Imagine this: a leader steps onto a stage, his voice warm, his eyes shining with compassion. He tells you that you matter, that you are seen, that in his presence you are safe. For someone searching for belonging, it feels like a miracle. But what if that love, that safety, that promise of belonging is a trap? This is how the slow theft of self-worth begins. Not with threats, not with violence, but with something far more disarming: kindness. In the 1950s, Jim Jones was not yet a figure of horror. He was a man of hope. He opened his doors to the poor, the marginalized, the forgotten. He preached racial equality at a time when America was divided. To many, he was a savior. People walked into the People's Temple feeling like they had finally found home. Jones understood something fundamental about human psychology. Every one of us longs to feel valued, and when someone offers that value in abundance, it feels irresistible. Followers described him as charismatic, generous, even fatherly, but beneath that facade was the first move of control. Approval becomes currency. The first silent sign that your self-worth is being stolen is subtle. You begin to measure your value through someone else's eyes. At first, Jones's approval felt like a gift: applause for volunteering, praise for loyalty, encouragement for sacrifice. But slowly, members began to doubt their own worth outside of his validation. A kind word from Jones could lift them into euphoria. A cold glance could leave them crushed with guilt. This is psychological conditioning. In behavioral psychology, we call it intermittent reinforcement, the same principle that keeps gamblers hooked at slot machines. You never know when the reward will come, so you chase it harder. Jones's approval became the slot machine of the soul. Followers gave more, obeyed more, and trusted more, all in hopes of winning his affection again. When your self-worth depends on another person's approval, you no longer stand on your own. You stand in theirs, and the ground beneath you is always shifting. Here's the dangerous truth: love and control can look identical at first. Someone showers you with kindness, attention, even opportunities. It feels like care, but ask yourself, do you still feel valuable when that approval disappears? Or does your sense of self collapse? That's the line between genuine love and manipulative control. Genuine love affirms who you already are. Manipulative control convinces you that without them, you are nothing. It's easy to look back at history and wonder, how could people have fallen for Jim Jones? But the question we should be asking is, how often do we allow subtle acts of validation or rejection to define our own worth today? From relationships to workplaces to social media, how much of your value still belongs to you, and how much have you outsourced to the approval of others? Because every theft of self-worth begins not with chains, but with a smile. What happens when you can no longer trust your own thoughts? When every question you ask is turned back on you, not as curiosity, but as weakness? This is the second theft of self-worth, and it happens through one of the most insidious tools of manipulation: gaslighting. Gaslighting is a psychological tactic where reality itself becomes blurry. It begins when someone convinces you that your doubts, your questions, your instincts are not reliable. Over time, you stop believing in your own mind. In the People's Temple, Jim Jones was a master at this. If a member ever questioned his choices, his teachings, or his methods, he did not respond with reason. Instead, he reframed the doubt as evidence of corruption. He would say, "That's not your thought. It's the enemy speaking through you." Do you see the trap? The very act of thinking critically was twisted into proof of betrayal. Followers learned quickly that questioning wasn't just discouraged, it was dangerous. This leads to the second silent sign. You start apologizing for simply asking questions. Members who voiced concerns often begged forgiveness afterward, not for being disrespectful, but for daring to think differently. Imagine what that does to a person's sense of self. When even your curiosity requires an apology, you begin to silence yourself before anyone else does. And in that silence, your self-worth shrinks. The third silent sign is even more dangerous. You start trusting their judgment more than your own instincts. In Jonestown, if someone felt exhausted, Jones told them it was spiritual weakness. If someone felt afraid, he told them fear was proof of disloyalty. Slowly, people abandoned the truth of their own bodies and emotions, replacing it with his interpretation. And once you give up your instincts, you give up your compass. You no longer ask, is this right for me? Instead, you ask, will this please them? This doesn't only happen in cults, it happens in toxic relationships, workplaces, and friendships. A partner who says, you're overreacting, it's all in your head. A boss who dismisses your valid concerns as not being a team player. A friend who makes you question whether your feelings are legitimate. The strategy is always the same. Take your doubts, turn them into flaws, and make you apologize for having them. Gaslighting replaces your mirror with theirs. Instead of seeing yourself, you see only the reflection they hand you. And every time you choose their version of reality over your own, your self-worth fades a little more. So ask yourself, who in your life reframes your doubts as weakness? Who benefits when you apologize for your instincts? Because when your mind's mirror is controlled by someone else, you stop recognizing who you truly are. Picture a room filled with people chanting the same words, raising their hands in unison, their voices blending into one. It feels powerful, almost sacred, but beneath that unity lies a dangerous truth. The more you think like the group, the less you remember how to think for yourself. This is the third theft of self-worth, when your individuality dissolves into the crowd. Psychologists call this phenomenon groupthink. It happens when the desire for harmony or belonging becomes so strong that people silence doubts, ignore evidence, and even go against their own values to stay part of the collective. Groupthink doesn't demand violence to take hold. All it needs is a subtle fear, the fear of standing out. Because once you believe your survival, your acceptance, even your worth depends on the group, conformity becomes irresistible. The fourth silent sign is clear. You stop voicing your opinions, not because you suddenly agree, but because you fear what will happen if you don't. In the People's Temple, members often swallowed their doubts during meetings. If someone disagreed with Jones or questioned the rules, the group's reaction was swift. Glares, whispers, public shaming. To survive, many chose silence, and silence becomes habit. Soon, you don't just avoid conflict, you erase your own thoughts before they can surface. The fifth silent sign cuts even deeper. You begin to feel guilty for wanting independence. Jones preached that individuality was selfish. He told his followers that the I must always bow to the we. Wanting time alone, pursuing personal dreams, or even longing for privacy was painted as betrayal. Members carried shame for simply desiring what makes us human, freedom. And that shame is powerful. Because once you believe that independence is wrong, you chain yourself before anyone else does. Jones reinforced groupthink through rituals, long, exhausting meetings, communal living, group confessions. Everything was designed to blur the line between the self and the collective. Imagine confessing your personal doubts to hundreds of people only to have the crowd judge you. Imagine living in an environment where loyalty to the group was the highest virtue. Over time, even private thoughts began to feel dangerous. That's how individuality was erased, one ritual at a time. But here's the unsettling part. This isn't just history. Groupthink still manipulates us today. Think about times you stayed silent in a meeting because everyone else agreed, or when you laughed at a joke you didn't find funny just to fit in, or when social media trends pressured you into opinions you didn't fully believe. Peer pressure may not look like a cult, but the psychology is the same. Silence your voice, feel guilt for independence, and let the crowd decide your worth. So ask yourself, are you thinking freely, or are you drowning in the comfort of agreement? Because the moment you lose your individual thought, you give someone else permission to think for you. Imagine waking up every morning, knowing that what you eat, when you sleep, even what you're allowed to know about the world, all of it is controlled by someone else. At first, you may resist, but over time, resistance fades. Helplessness no longer feels like oppression. It feels normal. This is the fourth theft of self-worth and the slow replacement of autonomy with dependency. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. It happens when repeated attempts to resist or change your circumstances fail. Eventually, you stop trying. You accept the cage as your world, even if the door is wide open. In experiments, dogs placed in enclosures with mild shocks eventually stopped trying to escape, even when escape became possible. Humans are no different. When we're conditioned to believe we have no control, we hand over the power of choice without a fight. This leads to the sixth silent sign. You begin to rely on someone else for every decision. In the People's Temple, Jim Jones created an environment where independence was systematically stripped away. Members couldn't decide what to eat, food was rationed, they couldn't decide when to rest, sleep was interrupted with late-night meetings, they couldn't decide what to believe. Information from the outside world was filtered or banned. Every choice became his choice. And once you surrender your decisions, you start to doubt your ability to make them at all. Jones understood that if you control the basics of survival, you control the mind. Hunger weakens resolve. Exhaustion fogs critical thinking. Isolation cuts off alternative perspectives. By manipulating food, sleep, and information, Jones wasn't just running a community, he was engineering dependency. His followers learned to look to him not just for spiritual guidance, but for the most basic instructions on how to live. And here's the haunting part. Over time, many stopped seeing it as oppression. It became routine. They believed they needed him, when in reality, he needed their obedience. Dependency sneaks into modern life in ways we don't always recognize. Think of a relationship where one partner says, "Don't worry, I'll handle everything," until the other stops making choices altogether. Or a workplace where employees feel paralyzed without the boss's approval, even on minor decisions. Or the digital world where algorithms feed us what to think, watch, or buy until we forget how to choose for ourselves. Dependency often begins with convenience, but it ends with captivity. The quiet death of autonomy rarely comes with chains. It comes with habits of looking outward instead of inward, of waiting for permission instead of trusting your own judgment. So ask yourself, where have you stopped making your own choices? Who benefits when you doubt your ability to decide? Because every time you trade independence for comfort, you tighten the shackles of dependency, and the harder it becomes to remember you were free in the first place. There is a voice inside each of us. It warns us when something feels wrong. It encourages us when the path is unclear, and it reminds us of who we are. But what happens when that voice grows so faint that you can no longer hear it, or worse, when you no longer trust it? This is the final theft of self-worth, when your inner voice falls silent. The seventh silent sign is devastating. You stop listening to your inner compass. Instead of asking, "What do I believe?" you ask, "What would they want me to believe?" By the final days of Jonestown, many followers no longer questioned Jim Jones's commands. Their instincts screamed against the horrors unfolding, but years of conditioning had muted those signals. They looked outward for direction even in the face of tragedy. And so, more than 900 people drank the poison that ended their lives. Many not because they wanted to, but because they could no longer hear their own voices above the roar of control. The tragedy of Jonestown wasn't only the loss of life, it was the loss of self long before the final act. Autonomy, curiosity, individuality, all had been chipped away until silence was the only thing left. Jones didn't just lead his followers to their deaths, he erased their ability to choose a different life. And that is the ultimate theft of self-worth. When you no longer believe your own voice matters. The most dangerous theft is not of freedom or possessions or even safety. It is the theft of your inner self, the voice that makes you uniquely you. And here's the truth. This theft doesn't just happen in cults. It happens in toxic relationships, manipulative workplaces, even in cultures of conformity where speaking up feels dangerous. Every time you silence your instincts to avoid conflict, every time you trust someone else's judgment over your own, every time you feel guilty for wanting independence, you move one step closer to losing that inner voice. But here's the good news. Voices can return. Self-worth can be rebuilt. Recognizing the 7 silent signs is the first step. 1. Doubting your own worth. 2. Apologizing for questioning. 3. Trusting their judgment over your instincts. 4. Silencing your opinions to avoid conflict. 5. Feeling guilty for wanting independence. 6. Relying on them for every decision. 7. Forgetting or distrusting your inner voice. Once you name them, you can fight them. You can reclaim your voice, strengthen your worth, and remind yourself that no one else gets to define who you are. History whispers its warnings, echoing from Jonestown to every corner of our modern lives. The question is not whether those whispers exist. The question is, are we listening? Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and join the conversation in the comments. Which silent sign hit you the hardest?